Welcome back to Reimagining Cyber, the podcast that dives deep into the people, technology, and strategies shaping our digital world. My name is Ben, and today's episode is a big one. We're going to be unpacking Operation Endgame, one of the most extensive, coordinated cybercrime takedowns in history. You may have seen it first breaking the headlines just towards the end of last week. Well, who better to break it down and reflect on this is Tyler Moffitt, our cybersecurity analyst and resident threat intel junkie. Tyler, welcome back.
Hey, Ben. Always a pleasure. Operation Endgame, absolutely one for the books. I'm glad to be talking about it because, not only massive international collaboration, but a full spectrum attack on the malware infrastructure. It's a landmark moment in the tactics and what they're doing. And really, like we talked about it on previous podcasts, how I think 2025 compiling on top of 2024 might be a really big year in sort of the authorities gaining the upper hand against the cybercriminals. We had made predictions like that. And this is the biggest of the biggest as far as what we've seen so far. And I'm really glad to be talking about it.
Yeah, go on then. Give me the overview. What is Operation Endgame?
So, right, multinational law enforcement-led disruption campaign, right, focused on, this is important and key, dismantling botnets and the malware loaders, which are the first stage in the ransomware attack chain. So I've written about this quite a lot and how this all works and sort of the underground malware ecosystem for just ransomware in general. And you have to realize ransomware payload, like when you hear about, Akira, Black Basta, Blockbit, Ransom Hub, whoever, their payloads, the ransomware payload is the final stage in any sort of attack. And in order to facilitate or get that payload ready to deploy, you have to obviously compromise a single system, whether it's through phishing credentials or like exploits that they were able to sneak their way onto a one computer. They sneak their way onto a one computer, usually using, these malware loaders, right? And then from there, create persistence on that one computer and using the botnets, right? And then they moved laterally, right? Through the entire environment. That's the purpose, is you infect one computer, make sure you have persistence on it, then move laterally throughout the entire environment. So that way you can sort of case the joint, right? Analyze who you've breached. Is it a hospital or a charity or manufacturing plant? It doesn't matter. They're going to be looking through all the documents and for data exfiltration or even looking at financials, right? To see how much money you have in the bank so they know how much money to charge so you can't play games with them. And then they deploy the ransomware. Right. And so this was huge to go after the very first. They're sort of going supply chain route in attacking the ransomware authors. So let's start from the beginning. Basically, May 27th to May 30th of 2024, Europol, Eurojust, FBI, UK's NCA, Germany's BKA, and a whole bunch of others, right? They targeted core delivery mechanisms used by the ransomware gangs. So like loaders, Iced ID, TrickBot, CACBot, Bumblebee, Smoke Loader, Pikabot. These are all very, very, very popular botnets. And we've written about them before. They've even been on top of our nastiest malware like 2020, 2021. And they're really, really important to go after these, if you will, the first stage in their ransomware attack chain.
Essentially, they didn't just hit the one ransomware group. They went for the infrastructure that feeds all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that was their purpose and aim. These loaders, they're like cybercrime logistic platforms. They deliver ransomware, remote access tools, credential stealers, you name it, all compacted into this nice, easy to use tool, right? And so cutting them off at the source is like intercepting the missiles before they've even been launched, if that makes sense.
Okay, let's break down some of the technical pieces. What are these loaders? Why are they so critical?
Sure, right. So I guess I'll break down some of the key ones we've written about before. TrickBot, written a lot about them. They're long-lived, right? Been around for, I think, decades. But it's evolved into, a full malware platform reused by famous, ransomware groups, gangs like Conti, Ryuk, and others, which have then rebranded since into other ransomware. That's pretty much what happens whenever these ransomware gangs get in like a big authority tail or anybody is chasing them. They sort of take a break for 3 months and then come back and rebrand. But this has been used quite a bit. And then CACbot, one of the biggest loaders globally, took years to kill. And it was weakened in 2023, but it had remnants still active. Like, again, very difficult to do full disruption, but they did it here. And Iced ID is a banking Trojan that turned into a ransomware delivery tool. That's actually a very common story. Most of these, like TrickBot, CACbot, IceID, they were around before ransomware even existed, and so they were primarily like financial credential scraping and gathering tools, right? But then they pivoted to aid in ransomware delivery because it just made way more money. Also, Bumblebee. This is a newer loader designed post Emotet. If you haven't heard of Emotet, oh my God, Emotet's been around forever. And they were probably the most widely used botnet for spam emails for, getting that foothold in the environment. And so post Emotet option, Bumblebee's really popular right now. And then Picabot and SmokeLotter. These again, payload delivery platforms for, they are used by high tier actors, sort of the top level ransomware groups, like the top five, if you will. They like to use them. They like to use them a lot. And so essentially all of them use modular code bases, command and control server infrastructure, and are sold or leased out as like malware as a service marketplaces. Again, all of these people pulling it off, the affiliates. I think I've talked about this, the sort of ecosystem and how it works. You have the ransomware payload authors, and they're the ones sort of at the top of the pyramid on one side where they never get caught, and they're the ones that are always wanted, but they create the ransomware infrastructure, payment channels, everything you would need, the tools, and then they give it to the ransomware affiliate. The affiliate is the one that actually conducts the attack. It's risk mitigation because the affiliate is the one that takes all the risk on. They're the ones that actually infiltrates the system, actually deals with the victim for payment of crypto. All the things that have fingerprints and trails that the, authorities would go after is from the affiliates. And so the same thing, the affiliates, they use this malware as a service, right? These tools that are all, well customized and coded to really be easy, and you don't need to know too much about them in order to use them. And so they just sort of lease it out to you, and everybody gets a cut, if that makes sense.
Essentially, they've taken down the roads and the highways of cybercrime. They've taken the heavy machinery and dug it all up.
Right, yeah. These loaders, the infrastructure that the ransomware groups really depend on, you remove that and you delay or destabilize the attacks at scale. I would really say like this is the analogy is like supply chain disruption. You've gone after a really important part of their factory and supplying the ransomware attack. And if you take a big component out, it can't proceed further.
Okay, then let's talk about the arrests, the seizures, the disruption, if you like. What did law enforcement actually do in the takedown?
It's basically like a blitz surprise, right? Across 4 days, over 100 servers were taken down in the Netherlands, Germany, France, US, UK, some more as well. But 16 residents were searched with 4 key arrests. 2 were in Armenia, 1 in Ukraine, 1 in Portugal, and over 2,000 domain names were seized or sinkhole to redirect traffic, right? And the international arrest warrants were issued for 8 suspects with rewards offered for 3 of them. And they even launched a darknet site called Operation Endgame, calling out, wanted suspects directly, kind of like a cybercrime most wanted list, right where the criminals live, if that makes sense.
And who are these people?
Yeah, so these are our high-level developers and operators behind the loader malware families, not just affiliates, and the people at the bottom. And obviously that's where they call them out. And they've always had these wanted, FBI wanted, here's $10 million for anything that leads to the arrest of these people. And none of them have been, the high-level people have been arrested yet. Okay. But they've definitely, right now, there's more already added to this list. So the Department of Justice named 3 Russians, offering 10 million in bounties through the State Department. So again, 10 million is the cap right now. It was upped from 5 million, I think like 4 or 5 years ago. Inflation's still gotten pretty bad. I think it's not, it should be worth more than that, but that's just my opinion. One key individual was a 37-year-old Armenian who helped develop and distribute Bumblebee. Again, none of these guys are arrested. They're just named and plastered on the dark net and everywhere else because they're hoping that someone will rat them out and get $10 million, if that makes sense. Some are linked to ransomware crews, but Many are specialists who, only develop, sell, and maintain that malware infrastructure.
So, as you mentioned earlier on, this really is focusing on the supply chain, not just the foot soldiers.
Right, exactly. The supply chain is the most important because the affiliates who conduct most of the attacks, they rely on this infrastructure. Again, a lot of them don't even really know how to code that well without using ChatGPT or anything. They don't really know too much. And you don't need to know that the whole purpose of this ecosystem is to take the useful idiots, they're the affiliates who, conduct or exhibit all the risk in conducting the attack, dealing with the victim for payment, but they rely on these tools to work, the infrastructure to be there, right? Everything else has to work in order for them to be able to do their job and do this risk mitigation. And so if you go after the supply chain, think of it like taking out the software vendors for the ransomware crews. I mean, it's really huge.
We have, of course, seen takedowns before. Emotet, Lockbit, and Hive all spring to mind. But what made this one different, do you think?
I would say that this was bigger in scope and better, smarter execution. It was coordinated across multiple countries in real time, and they targeted the delivery tier, not just the payload. So they focused on persistent disruption, right? Domains sinkholed, infrastructures destroyed or even seized, not just temporarily paused. And they used, public facing tactics like naming criminals on the dark web to deter others. I'm sure it had an impact doing that, right? And crucially, this targeted the loader market, which feeds nearly every ransomware group, right? Instead of just going after one specific loader like Emotet or one specific ransomware group like Lockbit, in which case, even if everything's taken down, they're able to go on vacation, pivot, come back, build from scratch. This went after multiple, essentially all the big major loaders in the market. So then almost every major ransomware group is impacted by this. So the ripple effects are massive. Like this affects, pretty much all the major groups right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What are the real world implications then? Have we seen a slowing in ransomware?
Yeah, I would say it already has. We've already seen a drop in Bumblebee and ICE ID sightings across telemetry. Loader developers are scrambling to rebuild infrastructure, which takes time and risk. I do think they will. I don't think this is like the end and they've done it. Oh, they've defeated ransomware. Don't everybody get your hopes up there. But this is a significant blow. New ransomware developments slow down if there's no reliable delivery mechanism. That was the aim, right? That was the purpose of this. So it'll take them a while to rebuild this and all the ransomware groups that rely on this infrastructure to be, back online. Again, though, it's not a silver bullet. Groups like Scattered Spider, Ransom Hub, Black Basta, they do still have like private tools and insiders. Taking down the major loader markets increase costs, complexity, and exposure and risk for ransomware actors. So definitely a lot more for them to consider, but by no means is this like a full fatal blow or anything like that. And you still have groups that have private in-house infrastructure that wasn't touched that can still operate, but it's definitely a huge blow.
So what's next then? Do we expect retaliation, resurgence? What do you think?
Yeah, there was always going to be attempts to rebuild. I mean, they've kind of existed with that mentality. Whenever there's a big blow or any blow, they sort of take a vacation, spend some money, come back, rebrand, rebuild. But I do expect more takedowns like this, targeting infrastructure rather than the actors alone or the individual infrastructure. Like this was really important that to go after the loaders that pretty much all the major ransomware campaigns rely off of was pretty big, from a supply chain analysis. And so cybercriminals now, though, they may move towards custom or closed source tools to avoid public loader takedowns, like some of the other ransom groups that may not be effective. But law enforcement will probably go further with, financial sanctions, cryptocurrency tracing, like what is it? Chain Analysis does a really good job, and they partner with law enforcement all the time and trying to track and catch some of these guys. And AI-led detection of new botnets is probably helping the agencies as well.
What would be your final takeaway of all of this?
So I would say that the Operation Endgame being a success proves that we can hit cybercrime, the ecosystem where it hurts at the infrastructure level. What we've got to keep the pressure up and not let them rebuild, if that makes sense, or at least stem that as much as possible. They are going to rebuild. They will come back. Ransomware is not dead, But this was a huge blow, and it shows that we can have effect. And like we sort of illustrated and talked about and predicted earlier on, this is a big year. 2025 is a big year, and I expect more. I expect more takedowns, more infrastructure disruption that would cause big problems for ransomware. I mean, if you look at the numbers, just going back just the past 5 years and how much money these ransomware people have made, the numbers pretty much for the most part go up and up and up. And their best year, I think, was 2023. We saw a little dip in 2024 because we saw some big impact in what the agencies and policing entities were doing last year. And I think it's going to have an even bigger impact this year. And so I think this year will make less money than what they made last year. And so we'll have the 2 years in a row of reduced money being made. And that's a great trend. And I'd like that to continue.
Tyler, let's hope you are right. Incredible insights, as always. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Ben. Always glad to be here.
And thanks to you for listening to Reimagining Cyber. Do check out our show notes for links to Europol's Operation Endgame site and also additional reading that includes the blog post from Tyler. We'll be back next week looking at something that we think could be the big cybersecurity blind spot. I'm not going to tell you exactly what that is. The best way to find out is to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts, and the episode will be waiting for you on Wednesday morning. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.